This is just a brick and mortar, but the people who come, it is they who have kept the lodge alive for 107 years. If you see the charter, Annie Besant, a few days in May 1912, chartered this lodge, and with her blessing, it has remained open, uninterrupted for over 100 years. And with people like you who come, it will probably keep going for another 100 years. As you know, today's talk is titled The Monad, and I think that if you understand it and apply it to your life, all the other chapters are not very important. This is the key chapter that is very essential to our understanding, and as we go along, you will appreciate that. Before we begin with what the chapter says, it's necessary to recapitulate a few items that we have talked about in the past, but is necessary for this chapter. And what we start with, when the unknown source, Theosophy, says that that source cannot be understood or grasped because any understanding limits its unlimited powers. So we just call it the source. And as you know, the source manifests periodically and then non-manifests periodically, turn by turn. When it manifests, it's called a manvantara, and when it does not manifest, it's called a pralaya. At present, evidently, we are in manifestation, manvantara. So the sequence is, when the source decides to manifest, it begins with filling all space of manifestation with its essence. And that essence remains intact throughout the manvantara. So that's like a protective shell, you know. We have a house that protects us from the outside, and we conduct our lives in the house. Though the space inside and outside is the same, but the house gives us safety. Similarly, the essence of the source guarantees the orderly evolution of that manvantara. Having filled space, it then sends out a ray of its nature. That ray permeates the space, and that has the highest consciousness, pure, unchanged, and that ray is called Atma. So from the source there is a ray, Atma, pure consciousness, impersonal, unchanged, eternal. Now, for manifestation to begin, the Atma by itself is incapable of differentiation. It is the same forever. And for manifestation, we require change. To achieve that, the Atmic ray uses a vehicle, and that vehicle is called buddhi in that diagram. So buddhi is the spiritual wisdom that implements the concept of Atma for the manifestation, how it will run, how it will operate, all the different activities during Manvantara are organized and maintained by buddhi. So buddhi is capable of doing that because it is inseparable from Atma, and that we call technically a monad. The word actually started in Greece through Pythagoras, not called monad but monas, but the modern word monad came from a German philosopher called Leibniz, and he visualized a unity in duality. Atma Buddhi is one unit for manifestation. Now, having this vehicle, first thing it does in manifestation is to create different grades of matter. Without matter, consciousness cannot manifest. It is blind. Matter reveals the presence of intelligence. So grades of matter from the finest to the physical are created by over long period of time by impulses from the source. Having created the grades of matter, the source then with further impulses creates the forms of matter, the forms, the mineral, the plant, the vegetable. Without the forms, there cannot be different kingdoms. So, animal kingdom, mineral kingdom, human kingdom, they're all forms. Now the forms, they are created, they are not alive, they are all forms, outline, you may say. Now the next step is to vivify the forms, to give it a life impulse to start their life. And that is the job of the monad. It has, as I said, the intelligence of structuring the whole manifestation. So the monads enter the forms and by a sequence vivify them, and what we see at present around us. Now this vivification is done in a very systematic manner, and I'll briefly talk about how it is done. The monad moves through different levels of matter, unconscious, because it wants to start at the bottom, the physical. So it passes through all the finer grades of matter, unaffected on either side, but when it reaches the physical, it begins to evolve the physical. As it is evolving the physical, two kingdoms are developed, the mineral and the plant life. Mineral and plant, they are developed, and along with that, the physical is developed in us. The physical, if it is to be active, requires what is called the etheric body. That's another principle. The etheric body, as you know, is the energy body that supports the physical life that we display. I'm speaking now, I'm thinking. Behind all that is this energetic body, and the physical is molded on that energy, and the two continue throughout life. At death, the physical is unable to utilize the energy. The energy is there, but due to age and disease and other factors, it cannot continue the energy, and that is what we call death. It's not that and then after 3 days, the energy goes away, it's not needed, and we say the person is dead. Once these three principles are developed, then the next stage is the animal kingdom is developed outside, the mineral, the plant, and then the animal. When the animal kingdom is developed outside, our fourth principle is developed along with the animal. And that is why at that stage we have what is called the animal soul. There is no mind to control it. So it plays out all its passions and desires, and we are then display an animalistic consciousness. Now we may think that we don't have it in us, but even at the present moment, those who cannot control their desires, the mind is incapable for some reason, wrong behavior or misuse, we again display animalistic tendencies even in this age. It's there all the time. Now, once the animal kingdom is set up and we get the emotional desire body, then we acquire the mental body, the fifth principle. And it's a long process which may require, it's done in a very unique way, how the mind principle was injected into the four principles of the human being. Once the mind principle is active, that completes this triangle at the top, Atma, Buddhi, and the mind, the higher principles of the mind. They form not a double monad, but a triple monad. Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. Once that is formed, then the process of reincarnation commences. Before that, there cannot be reincarnation without the mind principle. And the literature shows how that was achieved without reincarnation, different races. So the reincarnating ego is our permanent self. It just comes back every time with new life, with a new personality, but that remains intact. Now, once the mind is in place and the ego is completed, the question is, how does evolution begin? All the system is in place. The Buddhi is there, Atma is there, the mind is there, higher mind attached to Buddhi, and the lower mind dictating the personality. Now, one characteristic of the dual monad is that it is impersonal, universal. It's called the universal soul of the world, Buddhi, because it's attached to Atma, and that attachment makes it difficult or impossible for Buddhi to differentiate. It is always what it is, self-sufficient and independent. So if evolution is to begin, it has to begin with the connection of buddhi and the mind, manas. That is why the word man comes from manas, and it means the thinker. We are aware that we are thinking. That is why we are called man, manas, the thinker. And the process then of evolution consists of the connection between buddhi and manas. Manas by itself cannot become spiritual. It is mental. It may evolve mentally, but it cannot be spiritual. The same with the personality. It cannot evolve spiritually without help of the monad. So when the buddhi associates itself with manas, then the spiritual attributes of buddhi are transferred to the higher mind. And the higher mind has 3 levels. So gradually, because of this connection, there's a transfer of spiritual attributes, inexhaustible in the buddhi, to the higher mind. And the higher mind then begins to be evolved, the 3 higher principles. When that takes place, then and only then does the personality begin to evolve, because the higher mind, having the spiritual attributes of buddhi, transfers it to the lower mind. Before that, the mind was merely a spokesperson of the personality, which, as you know, is a mask on our true nature. And that lower mind supports the activity of the personality and promotes its welfare at any cost. When the spiritual attributes of buddhi are made available through the higher mind to the lower mind, then only can the personality reflect to some extent spiritual qualities. So basically, the personality is a reflector of whatever energy it available through the mind. And if the mind becomes spiritual, higher, that is passed on to the lower mind, and we begin to show some characteristics of spirituality at the personal mind. We are reflectors. Just like a mirror, if it has dust, we don't see ourselves clearly. But if we clean the mirror, we see ourselves much more accurately. Similarly, when the personality begins to have spiritual qualities, then those are a reflection of the divine. And we can then say we move towards a spiritual soul. The personality cannot evolve on its own. The animal soul cannot become human without the mind principle. And the human soul cannot be spiritual without spiritual attributes from the monad, from buddhi. In one lecture previously I had said that when the personality tries to improve spiritually, it's like a man standing in a bucket and trying to lift himself up. But the mind says, you can become spiritual, I will help you, and you do this and you study this and read this, and it promises enlightenment. But it's a fake, it cannot do that without a higher energy and energizing it. So now we reach a particular stage where the question comes, when we get the mind, we become individualized. I realize through my mind that I am so and so, he is so and so, through the mind. It gives us individuality, and which is written there because of the mind principle. Now, if evolution is to proceed, we have to upgrade our one characteristic of the personality, that we are self-conscious. We know that. We are the only species that is self-conscious. Everything else in life is conscious, but we have the capacity to control, to decide, to direct our lives because we are self-conscious. And that is why we incur karma, and no other species incurs karma, because we have the capacity to make choices, self-consciousness. So if we are going to evolve as a separate entity because we are self-conscious, then we again need the help of buddhi. It has that spirituality in it. So what we are trying to become is spiritually self-conscious. Initially, we are self-conscious. The mind is there. It's not spiritual. So I know I myself. But over time, because the mind is connected to buddhi, we get a transfer of spiritual qualities and we become spiritually self-conscious, which is a very important step in our evolution. And that process requires, it's in place from the very beginning. The buddhi is connected to a higher mind, the higher mind is connected to the personality via the lower mind, and the lower mind can then calibrate the consciousness of the personality. But what is it that begins the system? And what begins the system is that the person involved must desire that spirituality. It will not happen on its own. The system is in place. Like if you don't turn the tap on, the water will not come, though it's there. So once the mind is preserved, the main trigger that starts this process is the desire of the human being. Now, many people pass their lives at the personality consciousness, and they do their best to succeed, and they do succeed, they do well in life, they may have a good job, a good family, many friends, and the mind tells them, okay, if you continue like this, you will be very happy. But at some stage, that person has everything that his society requires for his welfare, and yet he is not satisfied. There is something missing in him, it's like a hole in the heart. And then when that missing, he tries to find out what is it that is further required, more than what his life is leading now. And then he becomes a seeker, he or she. So once the seeking starts, that is the stage when you get, the system starts to operate. We are seeking to grow, to evolve, and different people have different means of starting. Some person talks, or you listen to a lecture or a tape, something triggers off the search. And once you become a seeker, then you start the connection of buddhi to the higher mind, transferring the energy, the energy coming into the personality to upgrade the personality. So the process of evolution depends on each person wanting it. It does not happen automatically. Just because I grow in age doesn't I become wiser or automatically enlightened. It depends on that person exerting by effort to create this, activate the system which is already in place from the very beginning. If this process continues and nobody can stop a seeker, only that person can stop himself getting discouraged, upset, abandoning the search. Temporarily, they always come back. So every human being at some stage will become a seeker. Some are earlier, some are later, but seeking becomes indispensable in the history of every human being's evolution. Now, we said, okay, by seeking, when it's activated, we become spiritually self-conscious. Spiritually. And as I said, the personality reflects that spirituality in thought, words, action, and it's visible. If this process continues, what is happening is that the higher mind, higher manas, is evolving. It has higher tendencies, but it requires the energy of buddhi to evolve. And the higher evolution of the higher mind creates a faculty called intuition. That's the next stage of mental evolution, is the development of intuition. Now, we read the word and we say, yes, sometimes I can understand something, I have a hunch, but that's not what spiritual intuition is. Spiritual intuition means understanding or instant cognizance without the mind functioning, thinking. As the higher mind evolves, there is more knowing than thinking. The personality has to think, make choices, and then accept the results. Intuition, spiritually backed by buddhi, does not require more thinking, but more knowing. And this goes on over time as the higher mind evolves its knowingness rather than thinking. And we demonstrated also in our lives. You drive the car, you don't think and drive. Your knowledge and wisdom of driving is in the action. Every action you take preserves the safety of the car, and your knowledge is incorporated into the action. That's intuition. You don't think and drive, you know. So when you know, reasoning is not necessary. What happens when that faculty gets more established? That layer of thinking with which we understand life is set aside. Slowly, little by little, more knowing, less thinking, more and more knowing. When that advances, then we know the object as it is, not layered by the thinking process of the personality. All our lives, we understand or evaluate life on the level of our own thinking. That is why the interpretation, they're all different. The word is the same. And how is it that the Bible or the holy books, you'll get 1,001 interpretations of it, because we perceive life through the lens of our thinking mind. And that prevents us from really and truly knowing the object. We see it through the mental process. But when buddhi evolves the higher mind into the faculty of higher intuition, that functioning is set aside. And knowing, what happens is you understand what you see as it is, not as you think it is, as previously. Now, one benefit of this is, for a very long time, we have been told that we are all connected. Over and over again you'll hear, we are all connected. And we say, yes, we are all connected. But 2 minutes afterwards we display that we are not connected. And because it's something not easy, the thinking mind cannot connect except in a limited manner. Now I know I have an arm, it's part of me, it's dear to me, it's useful to me, I know that, and if it makes a mistake, I don't cut it off because it's a part of me. And we do extend that connection to the family maybe a little more, but most of the connection to life is unseen, invisible, and I'm unable to connect to that level, unseen level. Now we are told that we are custodians of the planet because we have that capacity. To be a true custodian, we have to understand all the connections we have to terrestrial life, all the levels. Then only I can be a good custodian. If I'm not familiar with what I'm supposed to protect, I cannot be, and we are not good custodians because we don't connect. When that intuition becomes more and more, and the knowingness takes over from thinking, then only we begin to connect in the real sense of the word with whoever is there or whatever is happening. And then that connection helps us in contributing to the welfare of everything, because we see the connection and we can use that connection. So that is the next stage of spiritual intuition, dictated by buddhi through the higher mind into our personality awareness. Now this is a very important, and it's not there just now. It's impossible for us at present to see experience the connection. But it will happen in time, and we are talking of the few people who are capable of connecting. And once you connect truly, you can extract the value of that object into your own awareness. You can make use of it, and that object can make use of your capabilities, and there's a union. When we talk of evolution in terms of consciousness, different states of consciousness, this state we are talking of, total intuition, is roughly equal to the fifth state of consciousness called God consciousness, and finally unity consciousness. Unity is the capacity to connect instantaneously with everything that we see around us. And it's a very long way off. Only great sages, say Jesus could connect, or Buddha could connect. John, how much time do you have?
As much time as you want.
I want to relate one example of this connection. which appears impossible to us. There was a sage in India called Sri Ramakrishna. Some of you may have heard of him because he was the guru of Swami Vivekananda, who came out in 1893 and spoke at the World Parliament of Religions, and he brought the Vedanta knowledge to the West, and it made a big impression, and he stayed behind and created disciples and a Vedanta society. And there is a Vedanta society in Houston also, and I recall that Roz and I used to visit when some monk used to come from Ramakrishna mission to give lectures on Vedanta. Now Ramakrishna was an illiterate priest of a temple near the Ganges river near Calcutta called Daksheshwara. And his life is chronicled by a French author called Romain Rolland. He wrote two important books, The Life of Ramakrishna and The Life of Vivekananda. And he says that more than once he wanted to stop. He couldn't believe what he was writing Ramakrishna, because Ramakrishna was an illiterate priest. But very early on, if he saw something beautiful, his thinking mind would disappear and he would apprehend the reality of what he was seeing, trance. So when people came to Ramakrishna and asked him questions on religion, he didn't know the answers. He was illiterate. He couldn't sign his own name. But he says, hold on, I'm going to ask Mother. And he ran to that statue of Kali, black, fierce looking. And to us it's a statue, just black. But to him, because he had that intuition to connect, he would tell that statue, Mother, so-and-so is asking this question. And instantaneously, the mother, not visibly, but invisibly, would give him the answers. And he'll run back to that person and say, Mother says so-and-so, and he would talk in the highest level of knowledge. He doesn't have that knowledge, but the mother gave it to him and he answered the questions. That is one modern example of how this connection is made to everything we see. But it's not for everybody. It cannot be done immediately, but it will come in good time. We are householders, and that requires uninterrupted, focused attention to develop that intuition and leave the thinking mind alone. People have had these experiences. If you read modern books about, but that is temporary. They have a peak experience and they begin to see themselves in a different way and a different light. And then again, that light goes away. But that peak experience is always there to encourage them in the future. So, we have talked of the human soul, and when we begin to act with the value of spirituality, then our actions begin to take on another level. Ideals. We implement ideals, which is a spiritual faculty. And when we interpret ideals, we get a state of virtue and acquire a spiritual soul. So we transit from the animal to the human, and when we add intuition, spiritual, automatically we implement ideals without effort, and that is the spiritual soul, and that to some extent completes the human evolution. Evolution is basically a process of returning. We came from the source and we will return to the source. Now Adam and Eve, they were expelled from the Garden of Eden when they were tempted to eat the fruit of knowledge by a serpent. And in Christianity, the serpent is considered somewhat evil, but Hindu philosophy considers serpents as wisdom because they encouraged human beings, Adam and Eve, to begin the process of self-knowledge through the tree of knowledge. So it's a plus, but Christian theology considers it a minus. There's one interesting story about the time of Adam and Eve I read recently. And it said, people don't know that the first computer started at the time of Adam and Eve. And it says, it started with an apple. And there was only one byte, B-Y-T-E. The system crashed. So they forget all about computers till morning. The other benefit of this intuition is that you can collaborate, unseen but real, with the whole cosmos. Now the cosmos is moving as one whole. It's holistic. Every part has a purpose and it plays the role because it is endowed with transcendental intelligence, full of information of what is necessary at that time. Transcendental intelligence. And in a way, all life is a play and display of transcendental intelligence. It runs like veins through all the different components of the cosmos and connects to each part to the extent necessary for the whole to function as one. Unimaginable but real, and we are part of that process, and we can contribute. The more we have intuition, the more effective is our contribution to the functioning of the cosmos. Like if you have a car, every part is got a purpose. When all the parts work properly, your car runs smoothly, satisfactory, you're happy about it. But recently I read, I don't know if you read it, one person was not satisfied. He wrote that the only part of the car I don't trust is the nut who holds the steering wheel. So he was not confident of our ability to drive, so he called us a nut holding the steering wheel. And he was suspicious about it. Now, throughout my talk, we have used the consciousness of the monad, of buddhi, to evolve us on higher levels of consciousness. But buddhi also has another aspect called the energy aspect. And at the very beginning of the chapter, you'll see a diagram which illustrates these two aspects, consciousness and substance. They appear different, but they are actually two aspects of one reality. At one level it promotes consciousness, at the other level it promotes substance, evolution of matter, simultaneously. So the last portion of this chapter deals with the energy aspect and not the consciousness aspect of buddhi. Now the energy of buddhi with Atma is passive. On its own, it is totally satisfied, independent. So why should it do anything? It can't change. It's impersonal. So to use the energy aspect of buddhi, it assimilates the higher mind. For consciousness, the higher mind uses buddhi to evolve with spiritual attributes. When the energy of buddhi is to be used, it assimilates the higher mind into buddhi. So you can imagine the energy that the buddhi gains by being in touch with the monad and even with Atma. Very powerful force, and in literature is called Kundalini. We have heard the term Kundalini. It's a cosmic force through the higher mind, using the energy aspect of buddhi. And we all possess that force, and it's coiled around the base of the spine. But that force is a very fiery nature, high voltage, you may say, in electricity. And we are advised that till we are ready for it and properly insulated from its energy, it's not proper to awaken that force. It's premature. And still you find in the literature out there, they will encourage you in Kundalini Yoga, Agni Yoga, to activate that force. And if it is activated when the nervous system is not well developed, it damages the system and can even kill the system. Like we get a surge in our computer and some part of it blows. So if and when we prematurely awaken it without proper precaution, it's very damaging. In The Voice of the Silence, Madame Blavatsky says to the disciple that before you use the mystic power, Kundalini, make sure you slay your lunar form. Because Kundalini fire is symbolized by the sun, and the lunar form is our passions and desires. Lunacy is also a word coming from the same source. So we are well advised to wait till buddhi gives us the capacity to awaken it and use it. Since it's like a snake, it's called the serpentine power. And one of our presidents, early theosophical presidents, was George Arundel. And he wrote books on the serpent power. And that is the Kundalini energy that will ultimately open up our vision through the pineal gland of clairvoyance, clairaudience, bilocation, remote viewing, reading thoughts, extraordinary powers contained in that Kundalini as it travels up the spinal cord. But for the present, we are advised till buddhi automatically does it automatically, and we don't have to try to awaken it. And one can speculate that the modern symptoms of mental ill health, mental derangement could be possible because the individual, by some unhealthy practices, unknown maybe, arouses this force and damages the brain, and then the person is not in control And we see instances of it daily, of violence and inexplicable behavior of a very unnatural, and it could be due to the Kundalini overwhelming the system, and the person is not in control and acts in an irrational and unnatural manner. It's just a speculation, but one can, the certain drugs may awaken that force, or certain unhealthy practices will prematurely awaken that force, the Kundalini, and that person pays a price for that. Thank you very much.
So, use the term fire. Did you hear me?
You have to get closer.
When you mentioned the term Kundalini,
Yeah.
you also said fire and you use Agni.
Yeah.
Now, I know that we use the word Agni, for example, in Agnihotra, which is the Lord of Fire. So is that actually the same essence? We're talking about Agni, which is the fire, like earth, air, fire, and what are the elements? And Kundalini, are they married?
The fire that we see is a very poor representation of its real energy, which is 6 levels below the visible. That fire we are talking, Kundalini, is electric in nature, like a bolt of lightning. It can kill a person or scar a tree, a bolt of lightning. So the Kundalini also is supposed to be burn away all unnecessary impediments to our growth. At that stage, when we can control it, it will automatically take away the blocks and our growth can move forward higher and higher. So it is a sun aspect, solar, and our passions and desires are considered lunar. And that's why Madame Blavatsky warns that unless you control the lunar aspect of your nature, you should not awaken the solar aspect, the higher electromagnetic forces that run the universe and of which we are a part.
Yeah, I don't know if Israel Regarde was a theosophist. Was Israel Regarde a theosophist?
But
Do you know of the Golden Dawn, Israel Regarde? He wrote that in the preface of the Golden Dawn, the handbook.
sorry,
You can't hear me?
my hearing is
Okay. Let me go here. In the preface of the book for the Golden Dawn, Israel Regarde writes almost the same thing about conquering this nature.
refers to
The Golden Dawn by Israel Regarde.
yeah, there are many books about,
Was Israel Regarde a theosophist?
I don't know.
Don't know.
There are many people who are theosophically functioning without even hearing of the society. When you mention to them theosophy, they say, I don't know it. But their lives demonstrate that they are seekers and they are theosophists.
When you explain us the nature of Atma and Bodhi, how you connected it to the philosophy of Leibniz. Leibniz, philosopher Leibniz, he built his theory completely on the monadology. Can you give us one more? Yeah.
Atma Buddhi, monad, can be considered as a unit of consciousness. Everything has a unit. Inches, then 12 inches make a foot. They're all different names, but they're all units of length. Similarly, life force has a unit, and that unit is the monad. When it enters any form, it becomes alive, because the energy of life from the source is transmitted through the monad into the form, and it vivifies the form and makes it alive. That's how it happens.
Yeah.
You can.
Yes.
I can't hear you.
That's good enough.
It's good enough. You were talking about
I can't hear you.
you can hear me.
So if
You
you
were
go closer.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Where you hearing?
here. When the person dies, okay, this energy leaves, okay, the physical is dead. Now this energy or this etheric form, when it's in the human being, at birth, when it's in the womb, when it appears, or when it gets attached, when?
Without the etheric, the physical cannot function. Though I think I'm physically active, I'm thinking, doing this, doing that, but behind that activity is this etheric energy body molded on the physical, and very birth in pregnancy, as the physical forms, so does the etheric accompany it. You cannot have a physical without the etheric counterpart supporting it. And that's very birth, you have this combination. And when the heart beats during pregnancy, it is the etheric body that is making the heart beat. All our faculties, this nose has got no sense of smell. The ears have no sense of hearing. Behind it is the etheric energy. And these are all outward masks of the inner senses. 5 senses are not visible actually. It's etheric in nature. Another role of the etheric is it transfers the connection between our physical and the non-physical. The question arises, how does the physical influenced by our emotions, by our thoughts, that is physical, non-physical, and the etheric body transfers the same, connects it and transfers the physical to non-physical and non-physical throughout life like a network, and plays that role also. The energy of the body is not its own. It takes its energy from prana. This ocean of energy called prana. And then when the prana is taken into our system through the etheric, then we display life. And when the prana withdraws, the etheric is not supporting the physical, then the personality disintegrates with death.
Any other questions or comments?
Yes.
Yeah.
Talking about intuition. Can you hear me?
I hear you, but I can't understand you.
When we're developing our intuitional faculty,
Yeah.
how do we know that we're really knowing, or
Yeah.
we're just opinionated?
Yeah, Aurobindo. Yeah.
How do we know if we're
Yeah,
really knowing
Aurobindo,
something?
yeah.
Or we just
Again,
think we know something?
Aurobindo, a great sage of India who worked for Indian independence, similarly to the masters worked for independence. And he had a remarkable transformation. His father was anti-Indian. He sent all his children to England to be highly educated. 7. Aurobindo also went to be educated, and he passed his exams, and his father said, "Come on now, let's begin to work." But Aurobindo says that the moment he landed in Bombay from the ship, everything changed, totally transformed. And he did not work for the British. He worked for Indian independence in Calcutta, and he was arrested there. He managed to escape and came to Pondicherry, which is a French enclave at that time, and he could not be arrested by the British. And he stayed all his life in Pondicherry. But one remarkable feature that he began to experience very elevated states, so he couldn't run the ashram because he was always in that high state. So in a dream, a French woman dreamt about Aurobindo, and she left Paris and found a way to Aurobindo's ashram, and she became the mother of the ashram, a French lady, and he retired to an upper room writing all what he experienced. And when I was in Delhi for a conference, there was a book fair, and 30 volumes, he wrote 30 volumes, and I said I must have it. So I bought those 30 volumes, and I don't know how I brought it to Lahore, but I did, and I had it in Pakistan. But when I came here, I couldn't bring those 30 volumes, so I returned it to the Indian embassy to do what they wanted with it. The mother herself wrote 15 volumes, smaller ones. I bought those volumes also, and I'm told that they're with Jimmy in Karachi in his house. So Aurobindo's birth date was 15th August, the day of Indian independence. You can see how certain people, Annie Besant worked for Indian independence. She was imprisoned also. She's a Britisher, but she worked for Indian independence. So Indian independence was orchestrated by the masters long before it happened, and they brought different people to make it happen. And when you read his writings, very simple. He writes integral yoga, and it's worth reading Aurobindo because he makes it so simple but very deep. Integral yoga. And in Pondicherry, a town grew up around him called Auroville, and Auroville still exists. Foreigners stay there and use their expertise in crafts, vocations. It's an ideal city called Auroville, and the mother used to supervise that city in the beginning till she passed away.
Any other comments?
One famous saying of Aurobindo, I remember, when you have an aspiration from below, you draw down the divine from above. And we mentioned that when the seeking starts, it's an aspiration from below, and automatically it starts the system to draw down the divine. This was one of his sayings, that we need this aspiration from below to initiate the entry of divine into your consciousness.
Question. So let's give Fali